Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Heather Loeb, and I'm president of AIA Ottawa, and I'm delighted to welcome so many of you this afternoon. I did not expect to have such a good turnout. We have 11 online as well. And this is our first effort at hybrid, and so far so good. Keep your fingers crossed. So we're here today to see what the students have been up to. So often we have, these are experts on digital technology in the museum, or our, I'm still talking about our as if I'm still in here, but anyway. So without further ado, I'll hand this over to Professor Cerati, who's the one who's the genius behind this whole presentation today.
Thank you. That is the way I just like to say a great president works, right? If anything goes wrong, it's now my fault, right? So like deflect blame, right? So that's why she's president, right? So welcome everyone to our second to last Archaeological Institute of America Ottawa lecture. Bienvenue tout le monde à notre conférence du Archaeological Institute of America. Right, I'm John Cerati, and I'm the program coordinator for the AIA Ottawa Society. And I have the pleasure of introducing our speakers today. You know, that this is, I think, the first time in the, at least in my tenure in the AIA, that we've had non-faculty presenting. And I don't think it's going to be the last time, because you know, it's often said that you know, the strength of any program, any department is not just the professors, but also the caliber of students. And we've definitely got some of our very best from both University of Ottawa and Carleton here with us today. That I wear another hat here in that I'm the director of outreach and in charge of the volunteers at the Museum of Classical Antiquities, which is on the third floor here. And is it going to be open after? Yes, so it'll be open afterwards. Anybody who wants to go up there and see more stuff there, we'll have it open for a little while after the lecture, so you're more than welcome, right? But I say I'm in charge of the volunteers, but really I have very little to do, right? Because we have an extremely capable team. And I mean that, I really do have very little to do. They've been working very hard on numerous projects, you know, revamping the museum in many ways, recataloging things, and also making a number of 3D replica artifacts. So some of which you'll see today, so there can be some more interaction, right? So I'm going to introduce our two lead volunteers, our two senior volunteers, right? So Niġel Klemenčič-Puglisevich, sorry, Niġel, sorry, Puglisevich, right? Niġel Klemenčič-Puglisevich is a Maltese Canadian student. He's in his final semester at Carleton University, where he's studying for his BA in History and Greek and Roman Studies. He's worked with us since 2019, and but he came to us with a lot of experience. 8 years beforehand, he worked in various other museums. And unfortunately, this is going to be Nigel's kind of last hurrah with us, because he's moving on to bigger things, an MA in public history at the University of Western Ontario. So we're going to be very, very sad to lose Niġel, because I can say he's leaving the museum in a better state than he found it, definitely. And our other senior volunteer is Chloé Storm. She's a second-year master's student She is under the supervision of myself and Professor Chloé, and she is studying the lawgiver Lycurgus in Hellenistic and Roman Sparta. Chloé as well has a wealth of experience in, she brought us a wealth of experience before coming here. She's worked in the Cumberland Heritage Village Museum, the Canadian Museum of History, the Canadian War Museum. Right? And in the future, she wants to bring an interdisciplinary approach to the humanities in the fields of history and heritage. So I definitely think Chloé's future lies in this field in a museum, and maybe Niġel too. Public history is all about outreach as well, right? So I'm very excited. We get to see what some dynamic students have been doing for the last academic year. So without any further ado, right, when ancient meets modern, student work at uOttawa's Museum of Classical Antiquities.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, I think that sounds good. So welcome. I'm happy to have everybody here. So before we get started, I just want to give a land acknowledgement. So uOttawa is located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation that has been unrightfully occupied by settlers to this day. We acknowledge that we have a responsibility to the Algonquin and Anishinaabe to adhere to their cultural protocol while occupying their land. And we are grateful for the knowledge and connections we have been able to gain upon the unceded territory on which we gather and learn and teach.
L'Université d'Ottawa est située sur le territoire non cédé de la nation algonquienne Anishinaabe qui a été et continue à être injustement occupée par des colons à ce jour. Nous reconnaissons que nous avons une responsabilité envers le peuple algonquin étant donné que nous occupons leur territoire. Nous sommes reconnaissants pour les connaissances et les rapports que nous avons pu acquérir sur ce territoire non cédé sur lequel nous nous réunissons pour apprendre et pour enseigner. Merci.
All right, so to get us started on the lecture today, I want to give a bit of an introduction to what digitization even is, and what it is, how we do it, why museums use it, and why it's important. So put simply, digitization in this context is the process of making physical material available digitally, often by photography or scanning. Sometimes the digital files are only stored and used internally. Other times they're also shared publicly in databases or digital exhibits, or other types of projects as well, which you'll see throughout this presentation. Digitization can include many other forms and projects as well, like oral history and 2D artwork and photography. But for our purposes, we're working entirely with 3D artifacts here. We don't have a photography collection. We don't have any 2D artwork. So I'll get into the process of how we go about digitizing this material a bit later on. But people often raise the question of what are the pros and cons of digitization? Is there a bad side? Is there a good side? And I just want to say, I don't think that's a useful question. I don't think that there's a competition between the physical and the digital. I think that they are meant to exist in two complementary ways of working with each other at all times. Digitization has characteristics that cannot be replicated in the physical and vice versa. So there are many perks to having digital images and models available though, and I want to briefly mention two of those, and that would be access and analysis. So to talk a bit about access first, one of the major reasons that museums are choosing to engage in digitization is to promote access, whether that be for themselves or for the public. Digitization was already a large priority prior to COVID, but when COVID hit, a lot of museums experienced a bit of a brick wall because they could no longer access their materials because they weren't able to get back into their institutions. And that's certainly true for us. So we were working in the museum just prior to everything hit in March 2020. And one week we were in the museum getting all of our work done, and the next week we couldn't access anything. We didn't have a lot of records available. Our online databases weren't as full as we would have liked them to be. So everything kind of came to a bit of a standstill. And we realized that we kind of needed to pick up our pace digitally and get something done to have everything be more accessible for us in the future so that we can actually get some work done working from home, or even just to maximize our efficientness at the museum itself. So how do we make our data accessible, whether that be to us or everybody else? We work in a database called JSTOR Forum, which Georgian will be talking a bit about later. The database itself is strictly internal, meaning that we're the only ones that have access to it. So it kind of more or less serves as like a searchable inventory for us. But the work that we do in here can be published, so it's accessible to the public on a site called Omeka, which is kind of like a public database that we use at the museum, and we can generate digital exhibits there as well, so that you can visit and explore some artifacts in our collection from home. So this is just a screenshot from that, and you can see that we have one of our African red slit oil lamps available there for viewing. Another perk to digitization that I want to discuss is analysis. So using digitized assets to analyze artifacts sometimes reveals things that you just can't see with the naked eye. We can zoom in ways that is worlds more effective than just viewing things with your eyes. Things that you just can't see when you bring an artifact closer to your face or just using a magnifying glass. So this can help us to learn a lot more about our artifacts, down to even just the types of techniques that were used to produce them. We can also alter images to increase legibility or to emphasize certain details. For coins, which is what our museum studies seminar right now is focusing on, we've been able to work with them all digitally, thanks to being able to use photography and upload them to our database. But we can alter them to kind of make them more legible, because as you can see with this one, it's a bit hard to work through. So we can kind of change the brightness, the highlights, the contrast, and everything to make it more legible, and then produce a digital drawing to be able to see it all a bit more clearly. And you can even zoom in to get a better look and produce your own drawings yourself, just to get an idea of what this is saying. But it's a lot easier to look at this one than it is this one. So before we can even alter the photos to edit them and get a better idea of what's going on, we need to take the photos. So this is a project that I'm currently working on, where before I graduate, I'm trying to photograph as much of the collection as I physically can. And Chloe is working to upload all the pictures to our database. So taking the photos of the collection isn't really just as simple as walking up to the display case and snapping a photo of it. It's a whole process of removing the artifact from the case, transporting it to our back room, and putting it in our digitization booth, for lack of a better term. So in that booth, I have complete control over the lighting and the environment that it's placed in, and I can place it on this neutral backdrop with no distractions, and ensure that there's also a scale so that we can measure it approximately within the photo. So there is a standard for photographing these types of artifacts that I like to access from the Canadian Museum of History. It's free to access online if you want to check it out and use it for your own purposes. So these are just an idea of some of the standards that I'm using in terms of taking the pictures as well as exporting them. So this one is, of course, for the normal sized artifacts, which is almost entirely what we're working with. We do have some larger artifacts as well, but I'd say 95% of this collection would fit into this category. And here's 3 example photos that I've been working on recently. So these are all taken in front of the same neutral black background and in front of a scale as well. So the scale helps for both color correction, because we can adjust the white balance by selecting the white color on the scale, which is a pure white. As well as it helps for approximate measurement. Otherwise, you'd have no idea if this pig rattle here is 4 centimeters wide or 40, and it's pretty good to know that sort of difference. So placing the scale, you just want to place it in front of the artifact enough that you can crop it out if you have to make it more aesthetically pleasing. And you'll see some examples throughout the slideshow as well where that has happened. And it's also important to make sure that you're photographing from multiple angles of a given artifact. So if you're looking at it online, you can see both the front and the back of any given artifact as well. So this is a pretty standard approach to digitization. It's just photography, and ensures you're able to get basic digital formats that can be shared and worked with us by essentially anybody that has access to the internet. And you don't need to be an expert photographer to do it. I'm just a history student. I don't have a background in tech, but it's simple enough that I can get this done. And it's enough to get us what we need. But there are a range of other more experimental ways that you can work with digitization, and I'm going to hand it off to Chloe to discuss more about that.
Thank you so much, Niġel. Thank you. Oh, all right, you're already on that. Excellent. So hello, everybody. Thank you, Niġel, for that amazing look into the photographing process and I guess maybe 2D digitization. So we're going to move into the 3D now. So in September of 2021, coming into the museum, I proposed a new 3D scanning project. Now, the idea from this actually came from a conversation I had with a friend of mine regarding accessibility. So we were talking about museums and how objects are displayed in museums and how most of the time objects are behind glass because obviously you don't want people breaking them or touching them, getting their fingerprints on them. And so we had this conversation and we started asking ourselves, now what does this look like for people who are coming in who may have a visual disability, who might be low vision, who might prefer to understand the world through their hands or through another means. And this is how I came to the idea of creating a 3D exhibit with 3D printed models that people could handle and touch. Now, I got some inspiration as well from a few other museum exhibits, one of which I got to visit in summer of last year at the Musée de la Civilisation à la Ville de Québec in Quebec City. Lovely exhibit on the Maya, where they had some 3D printed artifacts. Up here you can see this is the back of a Maya throne that they had 3D printed that you could go and touch. Another place where I got my inspiration from was the work of Néstor F. Marquez at the Manacor History Museum in Mallorca in Spain. This exhibit, unfortunately, I wasn't able to see in person. It ran from May 9th to July 15th in 2018. So I looked it up online. And what they did here is that they took 12 artifacts from this museum and they 3D printed them and they painted them to make them as realistic as they could. So we see some oil lamps down here from the Manacor Museum collection. So once I got the go-ahead for this project, we entered into our selection process. Now, to select artifacts, we wanted to make sure that they fit certain considerations. Now, first of all, we had to pick artifacts that were like interesting, not simply visually, but also in the way that they were made and in the way that you could feel. So this meant artifacts with kind of bas-relief on them, artifacts with engravings, etchings, things like that, things that would pop up like if you really felt them. And unfortunately, this eliminated a lot of our painted ware. So we have a large collection of vases and painted ware. So we had to put those aside and look, what do we have that is tactually very interesting? Next was the size. So we had to ensure that the artifacts that we chose weren't too small or too big. If an artifact is too big, it becomes a bit of a hassle to 3D print, and it also doesn't really fit on our little scanning turntable. And if the artifact is too small, then unfortunately we have trouble getting a lot of that very precise detail out on the 3D print. Color was also something that was important to keep in mind. So the scanner doesn't pick up dark objects too well. Neither does it pick up glossy objects, things that have like sont reluisants. So to get around this, we chose artifacts that were kind of paler in color and more matte in finish. They did, when we were scanning, they did offer to put baby powder on some of our darker artifacts to make them show up better, but we decided that it wasn't the best idea to go and put baby powder on our artifacts. But anyways, and finally, we wanted to consider historical interpretation. So we wanted to make sure that the artifacts that we picked, we knew enough about, or they had enough potential to be researched. So this was stuff that we had a bit of a base on. So we selected these 4 artifacts. The first of which I'm holding right here is a terracotta pig rattle. It is Apulian, Apulia is in southern Italy, dating to around the 4th or the 3rd century BCE, and it is a gift from the Donati family. I will come back to this one in a second because I have a bit more to say about this, while the other 3 will be discussed by our volunteers. So I'll just go quickly here. We also chose an early Cypriot red polished gourd juglet. And this dates from 2100 to 1900 BCE. And we also chose, unfortunately, I don't have the lamp mold with me, but a lamp and lamp mold from Roman North Africa from around the 5th century CE. Now, unfortunately, this isn't the lamp that goes with this mold. We have the proper lamp in our collection, but it was part of our second batch of 3D scanning, so we don't have it with us today. But later on, come look for it in the museum. We will have it. So to get back to the pig rattle. So this piece was a gift of the Donati family. The Donati family owned an orchard in southern Italy, in Apulia, and as they would tend to their orchard, vineyard, as they would tend to their vineyard, and tend the ground, artifacts would start coming up. I guess that's what it's like in Europe. I mean, you can just find artifacts anywhere. And so they had a collection that they had for many years. And then when Mrs. Maria Donati came to Canada, came to Ottawa, she donated her collection to us. This is how we came into possession of multiple of their artifacts, including this pig rattle. So this rattle, supposedly, it would have rattled, but before it came into our possession, it was dropped and broke, put back together, and then it lost its rattle. And this would have been a child's toy. These kinds of terracotta figurines are very common at the time. All right, so I'll talk to you all a little bit about the 3D scanning process. So we were very lucky to be able to use the Einscan Pro 2X here at the University of Ottawa in the Richard Labbé Makerspace in the STEM building. And we're very thankful to their team who showed us the ropes and helped us with our scans. And so here we see, well, we've got our curator, Professor Holden, up there, and that's me, and we're scanning the Cypriot juglet. And so how this works is that you've got that turntable. See down here, we've got the turntable. We put the artifact on the turntable and it rotates while we have the scanner up here, which takes pictures every time it rotates. So we can change how many times it rotates, how many pictures it takes to get a more precise scan. And then once it's done a full rotation, we take the artifact and we flip it to get the other side, and we can do that as many times as we need to get every single section, every angle of the artifact. And so once we have all of these scans, the program will put them together into a full 3D object. And so here we've got the lamp in person, and then up here on the screen, we've got what it looked like once it had been turned into a 3D model. And here we've got a time-lapse video of the 3D printing process. So I'll just let it play for you all, and then I'll explain a little bit. All right, so what you see here is the top of this lamp being printed. So this was printed in 2 halves because there's a bit of overhang. So printing it in 2 halves means that we get a cleaner print overall. And so how this printer works, this is an FDM printer, a fused deposition modeling printer, which will deposit plastic, which is comes in this roll of filament, goes through the nozzle, which heats it up and deposits it layer by layer, almost like icing on a cake, to create this 3D model. And so this print in total took, I think, 22 hours. And this part, which was half of the print, took 12 hours. And then it was glued together. So yeah, so this is what it turns out in plastic. The next one. All right, so on to next steps. And so I've added a picture of the juglet here. So this project started off as an accessibility project. We wanted to create a different kind of experience for visitors. And we are still going in that direction. However, we have expanded in other directions as well. So we are now working on making educational outreach kits for local schools so that we can send out some of these 3D printed artifacts to classrooms and teachers with some teaching material, and teachers can create lessons based on the material that we provide them. And we're currently in our consultation stage, so we will be consulting with educators, most likely here at the University of Ottawa, to see what they would need in a kit like this, if they have any requirements, what they would like to see in kits like this. We're still working on our accessibility exhibit. And again, we are in consultation stage here as well. So we want to consult with members of the blind and low vision community to, again, see what they need from this exhibit. If they need perhaps items to be bigger, if they need details to be more pronounced, things like that. So again, we are in consultation. And finally, the digital aspect of this. So once this renders 3D models, but we also have like an online component. We've got the 3D scans on our computers now. So we have been adding these 3D models onto our Omeka website. So here you can see our website, and I think we have it. Yeah, we have it right here. So here you can see the lamp mold that we scanned in 3D. So it can be moved around. You can zoom in to see the design here, a bird standing on some type of vase or vessel. And you can see the sides and all that. Okay, and I'll just head back to the presentation. Yeah, so having these models accessible online means that other researchers can come take a look at our artifacts and see what we're doing, research the artifacts almost as well as if they were holding the artifact themselves in their hands. So during COVID times, I mean, this is extremely helpful for people who are doing research. And we're hoping that this will also be used by other classes here at uOttawa who want to study our artifacts. The future of our museum seminar as well. It might also come in handy for when we're at home and we're doing research on our artifacts. We can get that nice 360 view from the comfort of our own homes. All right, so that's everything for me. Now I'm going to pass the mic over to Tom, who will talk a little bit about the issues with 3D printing and with 3D scanning.
All right. All right, so hello, my name is Thomas Wort. I'm a student volunteer at the uOttawa Museum of Classical Antiquities. And I'm going to talk a little bit about difficulties in 3D scanning and 3D printing and a little more about coins, because I like coins and we've been working a lot with coins, both in the class, well, both in class and in the museum. So some difficulties with 3D scanning. Sometimes you get like this, like the 3D models will just meld together. You'll scan a bunch of different artifacts and then you go, okay, let's export this. And then they just meld together. And if you know what you're doing, it's an easy fix. I didn't, Chloe did. So that's good. That's all sorted out. That's fine. Also, you need very specific lighting to get it to work right, or else you're going to end up with some stuff stuck in the background. So the first time that the scanning was done, it looked like there was a piece of wood or cardboard that was used as kind of like a neutral background. And here you might be able to see behind me, I've got a binder of mine, a black binder that opens up, and I've just made a little corner just to kind of cut out all the natural light. As well, there's some difficulties with certain kinds of objects. And I actually picked this picture because this object kind of falls into that category. It's circular. And the issue with kind of more regular objects like circles, like this water filter, and unfortunately with pretty much every coin, is that when an object is more regular and it looks the same from different angles, the computer has a hard time locking the orientation unambiguously. So instead of putting them together like it's supposed to, it will smack them on the wrong way around or upside down or just not the right way. And I'm going to throw you under the bus, sorry. Sometimes you need to have multiple scans of the same object, or else you end up with nothing on one whole side.
I specifically didn't show that.
I know, I saw that and I was like, I'm going to show this. So that's the problem with coins, is that you have to get both sides. And sometimes you'll get like this one is fine. Like we could put it on its head. It's maybe it's a little fragile, and then we'll scan it and then it'll lock on and it'll fill it in all nice. But coins is kind of difficult. How do I start this up again? I figured it out. Some of the difficulties with 3D printing, unfortunately, is that if the models that you make aren't exact, the print can come out a little bit weird. So you need to make sure that everything is covered. And another disadvantage is that sometimes you lose some definition. Now, I love this lamp. And we saw details, like really nice details on these kinds of lamps earlier. They had like a concentric diamond. Well, the lion lamp that I have here is supposed to have concentric circles and spades. But an issue with 3D printing, keep in mind, I love it, is that you lose a little bit of the definition. You can see that there are circles and there are spades, but the concentric nature of them is a little bit lost. I'm not really sure how to fix that, but it's still so much fun to hold. I just love holding these artifacts. So now moving on to coins, going back to some nice circular objects. 3D scanning is very difficult on coins. We tried to scan this one. Actually, I tried to scan this one. I put it flat down on the scanner and it just spun it around. And every time I took another picture, I watched the definition of it go down. I'm like, okay, now what? So we turn it over, we scan it again, and it superimposed it wrong. It's like, okay. So now we've put it side by side, and that works a little bit better. And actually, this does work to our advantage because we can actually see more details at the same time. Otherwise, like in the museum, you'd only maybe be able to see one side of a coin at a time, whereas here we can see both. And also scanning coins is difficult because they're all quite different. They have a different color. The conditions that they were kept in until they were found are different. Again, color, the patina, you've got reflective properties, you've got the size of the coin, because some of our coins are probably smaller than my thumbnail. And that's difficult to read normally. I'm sure the scanner would have a little bit of trouble with that. As well, something that is a bit of an issue with the scanning is that you need to calibrate the scanner. And that can take an hour just to get the calibration all right, because you need to get the white balance, you need to get like the angles right. It's very, very precise. It is definitely the future, but we're getting there. Still some things to iron out, I'm sure. And now this is a timeline assignment, or one part of a timeline assignment that we did for a museum studies class. Now, in previous years, museum studies class was given various different artifacts. I think loom weights was a previous one. Well, this year for accessibility, students were given a coin. And you think, oh, one coin, that doesn't sound like too much work. But there's so much intricate detail that can be found in every single coin. And this is just one example. It's mine, because I didn't want to ask permission from anyone else to get their coin up. So I put mine up so you can judge it quietly, please. And it's just, it was so nice to be able to collaborate with everyone else in the class, to see all of their work and to put it together. And it's a work in progress, not because someone hasn't handed it in, but because it can be added onto in every subsequent semester. If more students are given coins, because we have quite an extensive coin collection at the museum, we can digitize them. And as well, like I must say, this would not have been nearly as easy if it wasn't Niġel that took the photos, because this photo really doesn't do the coin justice. You see the coin and it's very small, it's hard to read. The color doesn't really show. You need to look at it under a magnifying glass or even maybe a microscope just to read the stuff. And you wouldn't be able to see like the slight discrepancies, like how these letters are gone, that this is a mint mark. All of that, it's just hard to, it would have been so much worth had it not been for the amazing photographs and the acting towards the digitization of these coins. And yeah, this digitization of these coins really did make this class possible for this semester and any other semester where there's going to be a virtual aspect to it. And I think that's pretty much it for me. So we'll be moving on to a next artifact presented by Sophie. Thank you.
All right, hi. So my name is Sophie Vigneux. I'm a third-year student at the University of Ottawa doing a double major in anthropology and classical studies. And I'm going to be talking about the second 3D printed artifact that Chloé had mentioned, our Cypriot red polished gourd juglet. So red polished ware was formed by hand and then was later covered with a red slip surface that was then polished to a medium to high luster. Thankfully, this artifact lost a bit of its luster, so it was able to 3D print okay, and the reflective properties did not mess with it too much. But this technique was likely influenced by Anatolian immigration to Cyprus during the 3rd millennium BCE. And red polished ware has been found in both tombs and funerary and domestic contexts in Cyprus. Red polished ware makes up some of the earliest ceramics in our museum's permanent collection. And this gourd juglet, which is named for its bulbous shape, was acquired by the museum in 1980 from Christie's auction house, who identified it as being from the 2nd millennium. So early Cypriot ceramics can be a bit difficult to date because Variances were not necessarily restricted by region, and they also did not follow a set out strict progression. However, this juglet likely dates to around 2100 to 1900 BC, like Chloe had said, placing it either in the early Cypriot III or middle Cypriot I periods. So going back to what Niġel was discussing, in researching this juglet, online open access databases for comparison proved especially useful. I had a bit of difficulty with this artifacts catalogs because they had cited some comparable artifacts in various other works. Unfortunately, they had been compiled so many years ago that I had a hard time finding these references either online or in print format. So in this sort of situation, similar open access publications, and especially digitized catalogs by museums that have very large collections, can be particularly useful. And in fact, the British Museum's online published collection is how Thomas actually found the term for this little protruding lug you can see on it, this sort of bump on the side over here, which is known as a nipple projection due to its possible associations with fertility. And I found that this was one of the most interesting things for which digitized research was useful, because I had never seen any sort of bump like this on artifacts either in our museum or outside of our museum. And now on to the 3D printing. So 3D printing, as we were saying, can offer some unique advantages. It's a sort of trade-off with the real artifact itself. And although this is a multicolored painted ceramic, with the way that the red slip has worn away over time, I personally found that the smooth single color model sort of enhances the linear designs. As you can see in the previous photo, it can be a little bit difficult to see these designs exactly with the red paint chipped off and the white sort of blending in. But in any case, pictured to the right here, you can see the types of linear and geometric designs on each part of the juglet. In this first sketch to the left on the lip, you can see the sort of semicircles all the way around. And then descending down the neck, we have sets of horizontal lines and then zigzag lines, which you can't see in the photo there, but on the real juglet in person, you can see them, I promise. And then finally, going down the belly, there are pairs of parallel lines connected with hatch marks, concentric circles, and 4 horizontal lines at the bottom to round it out. So these remarkable designs can be a bit difficult to distinguish amidst the now fragmented red polished slip, at least in my experience. But thanks to the 3D printing project, these incised lines can be seen a bit more clearly, and especially when you're actually able to hold it up close and take a look at it. I know I have trouble seeing things up close, so I'm sure this would appeal to many people. And as for the painted features, which we were obviously unable to 3D print, there is always the possibility in the future or with other artifacts of painting it by hand, filling in those white incised lines to sort of simulate what it originally may have looked like. And now I will pass it to Georgian, who's going to talk about the next 3D.
I hope people can hear me. Ooh, that's loud. So I'm Georgian Parks. I'm a volunteer here at the museum. And the artifacts I studied for this exhibit, are a lamp and the mold that was made to make it. This is really awesome because it illustrates the manufacturing process, but also just because we have 2 objects that are so closely related. So to produce this lamp, terra-sigillata clay would be pressed into this mold, as well as another half of a mold, and then they would be joined together to create one finished piece. Then that would later be fired in a kiln. The manufacturing process has earned this specific type the title of factory lamp because the use of the mold meant that they could be mass produced. Oops, sorry. So factory lamps first appear in Italy in the 1st century and are found all across the Roman Empire. Where they were produced in Northern Africa, they took on a distinctive style. They're characteristically formed from terra-sigillata, which is a type of red clay slip. So they're sometimes called red slip, African red slip lamps. Most distinctively, they have a large rounded body, which feature a central motif on the discus. That's the flat part in the middle. And are sometimes, surrounded by elaborate geometric designs on the border, which is also referred to as the shoulder. Did I go too far, or are my slides not here? Okay. So there are slides missing, but I'll just skip on to this one. So the iconography of this lamp in particular features a bird in a vessel of some kind. These images are uninformative on their own, but when we consider them in context with other African red slip lamps, we can suggest that these are possibly Christian iconographies due to the fact that other red slip lamps have biblical scenes, crosses, or other Christian symbols. So it's interesting how research can contextualize something that's right in front of us. So because we started this research process with so little information, it was important for us to make sure that future museum volunteers and visitors would be able to access the information that we've gathered on the object since then, which again is one of the main purposes of cataloging. We also need to consider our formatting carefully since we're starting the digitization process, and we want to make sure that we're setting clear and comprehensive models for future cataloging. Furthermore, cataloging it and possibly publishing it online means that it's also necessary to consider how the object would be presented to online audiences and how researchable it will be. To demonstrate this process and the type of considerations we have in mind, we can look specifically at some cataloging fields on JSTOR, which okay. So the culture field is defined as culture that the work originates from. Based on the typography, we know that this lamp was produced in Northern Africa. Some of our sources define this as Carthaginian, which of course does mention the North African geography, as well as the Roman association. However, when we think critically about it, Carthaginian refers to the civilization of the city-state of Carthage, and this isn't exactly what we wanted to be referring to. Instead, we wanted to come up with a term that more precisely fits the cultural context of this lamp. Roman imperial was one idea, but that refers to a vast geographical range and needed to be more specific. We considered imperial North Africa to pinpoint the location and to mention Roman influence. But then Rome is not the only empire to have occupied Northern Africa, so this could be misleading as well. After some thought, we decided to use the title Roman North African, as it indicates the time period, the cultural influence, and the geography. Sorry. So the description field asks for a physical description of the object, as well as other information about the context and interpretation of the piece. Here we have a chance to discuss theories and comparable styles in more detail. So this gave us the space to provide potential researchers with a starting point for their own understanding of the object. Because of this, it was important to use specific terminology and phrases that align with scholarship on the topic. For example, this is the only box that could be used to include the information about the designation of Hayes type 2, which is a definition which helps us understand the lamp as in comparison with its type. So the materials and techniques field asks what materials and methods were used to create the object. Here we use the term African terra sigillata, which is a term for the specific type of clay used. We also use the term ceramic, which is much more general and which encompasses many different clays. But the reason we wanted to include both was so that the wider term, or because the wider term would make the item more searchable. This also makes the information more accessible to those who do not have as much experience in the field. The work type field is where you define what kind of object is described based on a list provided by the database. It is a fairly generalized list, as you can see on the screen, but it's used to place the object into broad categories. We decided the most fitting option was furniture because the lamp is a domestic item. However, we also selected religious and cult objects due to the possible religious associations of the iconography. This way, the lamp would not be excluded from searches for religious context. So that's just an overview of how we approach the cataloging of these objects, with considerations for how future catalogers will look at it and for online audiences and future research. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Georgian, and thank you, Thomas and Sophie as well for talking a bit about your research. So I just wanted to make an announcement about the museum. So after all of our hard work this year, we are opening the museum up again to the public, which I believe is going to be the first time it's been open to the public since 2018, I think. So grand reopening. So in April 2022, we will be open to the public on Mondays and Wednesdays from 1 to 2:30 p.m. Now, over the summer, the days change. So we'll be open on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Admission, as always, is free. The museum is located on the 3rd floor of Desmarais building, which is here. And we look forward to seeing you. Now, I want to say thank you because this could not have been done without the immense help that we got from the people around us, the people here, University of Ottawa. First, I want to say thank you to our volunteers, almost all of which are here. Clemency Robinson, Georgian Parks, Sophie Vigneux, Thomas Wort, and Valentina. Unfortunately, she's not here today, but thank you, Valentina. Accessibility, I want to say thank you to Patricia Berube, who we consulted with for accessibility. For 3D modeling and printing, I want to say thank you to Alexandre Lassalle-Le Breton for his immense help with absolutely everything that had to do with 3D printing and 3D modeling. Consultation as well. Thank you to Dr. Richard Burgess and Dr. David Schneider, who both helped us when consulting with certain artifacts. And again, thank you to the uOttawa Richard Labbé Makerspace, Justine Boudreau and Alexandre Lassalle-Le Breton, again for 3D scanning. And then finally, thank you to Clemency, and then I put my name here because I did some translation too, but for helping with translating the slides. And finally, thank you to Roxane, who is our digital humanities support specialist, Roxane Lafleur, who's been with us in our museum seminars class and has made a lot of this possible. And again, thank you to Professor Sarati and Professor Loeb for organizing this. And yeah, and thank you everybody for attending.
Thank you guys so much for that. That was absolutely
Do you want to
questions? People and sorry.
people online can hear you?
Okay, yes, so thank you very much. That was absolutely fantastic. I really enjoyed that. Great turnout, and I'll open the floor for questions. Do one of you want to take this at all?